Hey, what is up? My name is Chris and welcome to Coding in Public. Today we are iterating on a project we started last time, and we just have a really basic kind of hard-coded project where you can click off different habits, unselect them, and that's pretty much all you can do right now. Here's where we want to get to. We want to get to where you can actually switch themes and it saves it to your local storage. So if you refresh, it'll actually stay in the theme you chose. We want to create these habits dynamically to where you can come in here and say like, message friends or whatever, which isn't really a habit, but you come in here and you add this habit directly. And then we also want to make it to where you can right click, show a custom menu that shows the title, and then also allows you to delete. And if you refresh the page, everything stays just like it is. It remembers whether you've completed a task or whether it's still yet to be completed for that day. So this is kind of where we want to go. And there's a bunch more you could do beyond this, but I want to show you just kind of iterating on a project, what that looks like. So today, let's start by working on this light and dark theme toggle. If we come over here, you'll remember that we've got this whole area as a button with the class of theme. We've got a before pseudo element over this way that has is showing that little circle there. What we want to do is toggle that based off of when this button is clicked. So what we'll do is we'll come down here and say the theme, when it has a dark class on it, we want to take that before pseudo element and we want to transform it. And what we want to do is translate it. We're going to translate its own width, 100%, plus 4 pixels. And the reason we're doing that is because of the height or the width of the actual theme button versus the width of our before pseudo element and where we've got it positioned within that pseudo element. So if I save this here and come over to our theme button and I add a class of dark, it should slide over just like that. That's perfect. Now, what we need to do as well is we need to add that little icon. Remember, we have a sun and a moon icon. So during the daytime, we have a sun or light theme, and then during the dark theme, we have that moon. It's going to operate a lot like this before pseudo element, except it's going to be an after pseudo element. So I'll come in here and change this to after. We'll still have content of nothing. All that will be the same. We're not going to set a background color on it. But everything else here should be the same. We'll have to put it below the other pseudo element, so we want that to be 2. And then this will be right instead of left. Okay, so that's great, except nothing is currently in there. And that's because we need to add a background image. And what I've done is I've gone over here and I've grabbed like this moon, and then I just ran it through a URL encoder and changed the current color to the color for light theme or dark theme, respectively. And I've gone ahead and just put those on my clipboard to make this a little faster. So the first thing we'll do is when it's normal, we'll just save it there. It should show up as a sun over this way. And then we're going to do the same thing over this way as we did with the before pseudo element. We'll do it with the after pseudo element, except this time we're going to say minus 100% of its own width and then minus 4 pixels. And then we're going to update the content of that background image. So if we come over here and now we change this again and say dark, then it'll switch over, and eventually when the rest of the theme switches, that'll look perfect. So we've got the basics of the CSS ready. Let's go ahead now and jump over to our JavaScript and hook a few things up. First thing, let's get a little more organized. We'll say these will be our query selectors. Because you would probably load this as a module, it's fine to have these global query selectors up here. Next, we're going to actually delete eventually, so let's leave that there because we're going to have to change how this is written once we dynamically add new habits. But we're going to organize our code in a series of different objects, and it'll just make it a little easier for us to be able to run our functions. So I'm going to add functions here, and we're going to add those in 2 different objects. One of them will be called storage, and that will be equal to whatever functions we add in here, and then another one we'll call UI to update the UI itself. Under this UI, we'll write a method called theme. Methods are just a fancy name for saying a function inside of an object. If you want to know about different ways to write a function and why we call one over the other, when you might choose one over the other, I'll add a card to a recent series I did on functions. First of all, we're going to watch for when that button is toggled. So let's go ahead and grab it in our query selector up here. We'll say theme button is equal to document.querySelector, and then we'll grab the ID of theme, which is that button. And we'll come down here and say theme button.ClassList.toggle. We're going to toggle the dark mode. Eventually, we need to write an event listener, which will toggle this or run this function. But for now, let's get the function ready so that when we toggle it, it'll be really satisfying. So the next thing we're going to do is we need to grab the root itself, the root element. and we'll say document.querySelector, and we're going to grab root. We're only going to use it here, so we'll just grab it here rather than declaring it globally. And then we're going to do the same thing. So we'll say root.classlist.toggle, and we're going to toggle dark. Now let's come down here and write that event listener. So these are event listeners. And the first event we're going to do will be our theme button. So when theme button add event listener, when it is clicked, then we're going to simply run our UI.theme. And notice I'm not putting parentheses like this here because that will actually run it. Instead, what I'm doing is saying to the browser, hey browser, could you run this for me? And it should. So I'll save it, come over here and I'll click, and it switches everything over. That's pretty cool. Come back, it toggles it back this way. Now if I switch to dark mode though and I refresh, it goes back because we're not saving it anywhere in local storage. That's where this function comes in up this way. We're going to use just this UI theme to actually call that storage method. So let's do that. Let's write a short little ternary just to make that work. We could do it off the root or off the theme since we're both applying a dark to either of them. Let's just use the theme button. We'll say themebutton.classlist.contains, which is a way of checking if a certain class is on an element. And in this case, we're looking for dark. If that is the case, we want to call storage, which is our object. We're going to create this method here in a second, .save theme, and we're going to save the theme to dark. And if it's not dark, then we want to say storage.save theme, and we're going to save it just as an empty string. Let me make this a little clearer and then write the methods, and then we'll walk back through what this does. Okay, so let's come up here. We're going to write those two methods. We'll say save theme, and it will take in a value here. And then what we want to do is we want to say local storage.setItem. And then here's what we're going to call the key. All right, the key in our storage, and I'll show you this in a second. Let's call it habits_app.theme. And we're going to set it to, and then let's put backticks here so we can add our parameter to the value that we've passed in. Okay, so here's what's going to happen. I'm going to jump over here to our, well, let's switch it first of all. When we save this here, we'll come over to our application. You see that already it's given us this dark. When I come over here and switch it off, you'll see it goes light, dark, light, dark. Well, by light, it has nothing. I guess we could say light here, just in case you want to add additional themes. So then it will go from dark to light to dark to light. So what we're doing is every time we toggle this down here, we're running this UI.theme, which is a method that lives on this UI object. It's just a function. This function then toggles this class between dark and nothing. It takes that off. And then it also does the same with a root. Then we run this short little if statement, this ternary, and we say if it contains dark, then we want to save the theme dark into our local storage. Otherwise, save theme light. And then this is being called and run against. Now, there's one more step to kind of keep this perpetual based off of this habits theme, and that is to add some kind of event listener on the window that then listens for the DOM content to be loaded and then checks to see what our local storage is. Let's write the function first that we're going to use, so we'll call it check theme. We don't need to take in anything here. We can just say local storage.getItem, and we're going to listen or get the habits app.theme. The reason I'm naming it like this is because if you've got a lot of things you're saving from your site in the local storage, it's good to namespace them. So I know that all my things connected to the habits app on my site will be namespaced with habits app dot whatever the thing is that we're checking. I don't want to just check that. I want to actually return it to make sure that I'm getting that back, whatever it is, dark, light, whatever. Now let's jump down here and run and add an event listener. So we'll say event, and we'll just say window load. So on the window.add event listener, and we're listening for DOM content loaded. We're actually going to do a few things with this, so we won't just call that function directly. We'll add an arrow function, and we'll do a few things. First of all, we'll load the theme itself. So we'll say that the const theme is equal to storage.checkTheme, which is that method we just wrote up above. So it'll grab whatever this key value pair is, and it'll pass us the value because we're returning it from this function we wrote. So now we should have dark or light, whatever it happens to be, when the window reloads. And then we'll say if theme is equal to dark, then what we want to do is run UI.theme. And that will actually switch it to dark mode for us. So let's save this and refresh the page. Nothing should change. Come over here. I'm seeing we have an error already, so I'll have to figure out what's going on. It won't even let me do anything. So let's figure it out first. Let's see, 11. Oh, we forgot to add a comma here because this is an object. Okay, now let's come back over here and check this. We should switch it. It goes to dark mode. Let's refresh. Hey, it stayed in dark mode. So that's good. So what we've done is whenever the window loads, the first thing we're doing when the window loads is checking the theme. So we're saying get the theme and return it here. So it's returning it as dark or light or whatever. Let's actually console log this just so you can see it. Come over here and it says dark. If I switch this over and then reload, it should say light. So that's what it's grabbing. And then we're saying if it's equal to dark, go ahead and just run this manually. We don't have to click it, click this button. It'll just do it for us automatically, not manually. Okay, so that's the first kind of iteration to make this project a little cooler and better. We're saving that into local storage. The next thing we can do if we come back over this way is we can actually write this whole modal area that will pop up for us. We won't make it functional yet, but what we need to do is actually add some more HTML. So let's come over here and run over to our HTML, and we need to add a few things below this new habit button. So we'll first of all create a modal container. And then we want to do a few things on this because it will be hidden by default. One of the accessibility things we can do here is say aria hidden is equal to true. And we'll update that with JavaScript when we toggle the modal on or off. And then inside here, we're going to have the modal itself. And we'll have a few things. We'll have an H2 that says add a new habit. And then we'll have an input. And we'll give it an ID of title. And let's go ahead and add a placeholder as well. So we'll say placeholder, and we will say enter a habit name. Now if I save this and we run down this way, you'll see it starts to show up already. And we're going to hide that in a moment, but for now it's good to know what is there. Next, we're going to have a div that holds all of those icons. So we'll just call it, I guess we'll just call it icons. And then inside here, we're going to have buttons. And by making these buttons, the user can select them with the tab key to quickly jump to them. So we'll say button, and we're going to give it a class of icon. And then for each of these, we're going to give it an ID based off of whatever the item is that it is. So we'll say ID of book. And inside here, we're going to add the SVG. Now, let me go ahead and pull up my icons here. By adding them inline, so by copying them over this way and adding them inline, it allows us to toggle the current color based off of the parent's color. So if I save it there, you'll see it pops up over this way. We've got the first ID of book. Now all the buttons are going to look the exact same, so let me do that quickly and be right back with you. So we've got all 6 buttons and I've saved them, and you see them coming up this way. Now, obviously you could do something where the user can select their own, where they can like upload their own or something like that. We're not messing with all of that right now. You could even have it to where they could just enter URL to an image, and that could be used. But for right now, we're just going to keep it simple and leave it to 6 icons that they can choose between. Underneath the actual div of the icons, we've got a couple other things to add. We have a Modal Buttons div, which will hold any options they have, and those options will be button of add, and that will simply say add habit, and then we'll also do a button of cancel, which will simply say cancel. So I'll come over here and change both of these. Okay, so I think that's all we need to get our modal up and running. Let's go ahead now and jump over to the CSS, and we will style it. Let's scroll down to the bottom here, and we're going to start by saying we want our modal container. Now this container should be a position of fixed, and we're going to say top 0, bottom 0, left 0, and right 0. Can't wait for the inset proper to be more widely supported so we can use that instead of typing all that. And we're going to say display grid and place items center. That will set everything in the middle. And then we'll set the opacity eventually to 0. If I can type opacity. Right now we'll comment that out so that we can still see what's going on here. And then we'll set pointer events to none. And index or z index of 4, so it's above this toggle that we set to 3. You should probably space those out more, but for now we'll leave it at that. And then say transition, all 300 milliseconds, ease in and out. So if I save it here, nothing too much should change except it moves to the middle. Now we did have something on here that is kind of cool, and that was this backdrop filter. And on the backdrop filter, we have a blur of like 10 pixels. And in Chrome, this works just fine. It won't work actually in Safari. You have to add like a Moz prefix or something, but for now, we're just going to keep it real simple. You can figure that out. It's not like make or break for the actual design, so I'm not going to worry about it right now. So you can see we've got this whole fixed area here. That's our modal container. Now, eventually, we want to toggle that on and off. So what we do is say modal container.active. So that'll be a class we apply. And we'll say opacity of 1. And then pointer events of all so that we can click it. So eventually, we will toggle it on with active, and it'll go from 0 opacity to 100% opacity with that class toggled on. Let's next work on the modal. And to make sure we can see what's going on here, let's say border 1 pixel solid red. You can see what we're working with then. Let's set a padding of var medium. We set up all these variables last time to make it more consistent in the UI. Let's set the background color to our var of primary. If I save this, that will give it a solid background there for us. And then let's add a box shadow. So it'll be 1 pixels, 4 pixels, 30 pixels, so it's nice and blurred out, and then 10 pixels, a var of our shadow color. Now this is on the x-axis, the y-axis. Let's see, this is the blur, and this is the spread, I believe. So we've got that set up, and you can see just a real slight hue. If I were to change this to light mode, it's a little bit more obvious in light mode, but I wanted it to be kind of subtle. My code editor just crashed on me, so sorry, I'm jumping back in here. But as I recall, we were working on making it slide up. So we'll say we want it to transform and translate Y, and let's start it by being down like, I don't know, 30%, something like that. We'll move it back up to 0% when it's active. We want to set a transition of all 300 milliseconds on this, and we'll do ease in and out, or maybe just ease in. How about that? And now here's when we want to trigger it to move up. We want to say when the modal container.active class is ready, then go ahead and inside that find the thing with the modal class, and we want you to set the transform, translate Y to 0. Let's run down and grab our H2. So we'll say modal H2 here. We want to say text align center, and then we'll set a margin bottom of var base, which is, I think was just 1 rem. So give us a little bit more space here above that form itself. Let's go ahead then and grab the title, which is that form. I guess it's not a form, it's just an input field. And we want to do a few things. We want to say we want the font size to be the inherited font size, so that'll inherit from the body. And then we want the font family to be inherit as well. Same thing with the color. We want that to inherit as well. And then we'll set the background color to a var of light and a padding of 0.5 rem. If I save it there, you see it looks more like the rest of our website so far. I do actually want to change that red border. Let's change it to 3 pixels. I think we actually had one on there, a var of secondary on the finished product. So yeah, now that we've got that, we know where it's at. That should work just fine for us. What we do want to do is say that when the title is focused, that we want to set the outline to 2 pixel solid var secondary. This just changes the color to something from our theme rather than the default styling of the browser. Next, let's grab the icons themselves and display grid. And then we're going to place items center, set the padding to our var of small up top, and then left and right 0. And we're going to set it grid template columns to repeat, auto fit, min, max of 40 pixels at the smallest and 1 fraction at the largest, and then a grid gap of 1 rem. We'll save that, and you see it kind of already starting to take shape how we'll eventually want it to look. So we've got everything laid out in a grid. Let's go ahead and just add a border of 1 pixel solid red again, and then come down here and let's grab the icons themselves. So icons, this is kind of confusing. Icons is the parent and icon are each of the children. For the icon, we're going to do a width, and we're going to grab our var of medium, and we'll do the same thing for the height. And then let's grab the border radius, and we'll do 50%. And let's save that, and you can see it's starting to take shape. So you see how the children are stacked up. At the very minimum, they'll be 40 pixels, and the largest, they'll take up as much space as they can within their parent container element there. Let's set the background color of our icons to var of primary, and then we'll set the color, that's the actual text, to the secondary. And remember, this is the button, and so these setting the color here will set the color of the SVG since we have those in line. And we'll set the border here to 4 pixels solid. We'll use our var of secondary, and that means you can actually see them there. And if I save, you'll see them populate. Now, they're not quite in the middle, the SVGs in the middle there, so let's do display grid and place items center. And then let's add our transition, all 300 milliseconds ease in and out. And let's set a cursor to pointer so that when we hover over them, they will show this cursor. All right, so we've got that mostly done. Let's see, we do want it to where when we have the icon, we're going to add a class of selected. Then this will allow us to select that icon. So we'll set the background. So let me grab the background and the color from up here. And all we're going to do is switch the properties. So we'll say this needs to be secondary, and then the color of the text needs to be primary. And when those switch, then this will all go this light color, and just the text, the icon itself, will switch to the dark blue. Let's get rid of our border here. We don't need that anymore. We'll come down this way, and let me get rid of the console so that we can actually see what's going on. You see it's kind of below here, and that's because we're going to slide it up when it actually goes active, which we'll do with JavaScript. There's one last little section, and that is the modal buttons. And the modal buttons is the div that holds our 2 buttons. So we're going to say display grid, and we'll do grid template columns, and we just want it to be auto, which means set them next to each other. And we'll do a grid gap of 0.5 rem. You could also do this as flex, obviously, but again, I just like grid as much as I can, especially for that grid gap property. We're going to grab the add and the cancel buttons. Those are those 2 buttons, and we're going to say, let's actually grab a lot of the stuff from up above here because it's going to be this same stuff. So we're inheriting it, taking away the default styling for the browser, and setting all those to match as they should. Then we'll say we want the background color to be a var of light, and we want padding to be 0.5 rem. And then we're going to do cursor of pointer and a transition, all 300 milliseconds ease in and out. I'll save that, and then we've got just a couple things. So when we come over here, we'd like this, when we hover over it, let me make sure this is actually working. So I should be getting a cursor pointer here on both the add and the cancel, but I'm not. Oh, I think it's because I took away pointer events, but we'll add those back in with the new class. When we do hover, however, on the add or on the cancel, we're going to switch around the colors here. So let's bring this down, and we're going to say that we want the background color to be a var of secondary, and then we want the color to be a var of primary. Okay, so I think that's everything we need to do with CSS for now. Let's go ahead and now play around with some JavaScript. First of all, we need to add several query selectors. So let's go ahead and grab the modal container, and we'll say document.querySelector, and that was modal container. And then we need to add the plus button to actually show the modal itself. So let's call that create habit button, and we'll set that to document.querySelector, and it was new habit add, I think, which is kind of a weird name, but it's what we got. Now remember, we've got this input field itself, and then these icons and these 2 buttons. So let's grab those as well. So we'll say const new habit title is equal to document.querySelector, and it's just the title, it has an ID, and then we're going to grab the icons themselves. So that was query selector all, and what we want to grab is the icon, singular, which grabs each of those. The parent, remember, is icons, which again is a little confusing how I've named those, but we want the add button. So this is for adding a habit once the modal has popped up here, and you'll remember that this is just add, and then we want to cancel. So let's grab these, grab add here and add there and change this to cancel. Okay, so that should be most of what we need as far as query selectors right now. Now, in order to see this work, we actually need to go back to our CSS and comment out or remove the comment of this opacity so that it's as it should be when we first arrive upon our habit tracker. We'll come back to our JavaScript file then, and we need to write a few event listeners. So let's come below our event for the theme, and we'll say event. And what we're going to do is add an add habit button event. So we'll say create habit button. That's the button that we grabbed up top. That's BNT. That needs to be BTN. I'm not going to be able to let that rest. All right, so BTN. Let's go back down to the bottom here. So we want to add an event listener here, and the event we're listening for is a click. And when somebody clicks, we're just going to run a function we're going to write in the UI object, and that will be called open modal. And again, we're not going to actually manually run it. We're going to just tell the browser to run it for us. So that's the first thing we're going to do. Let's go ahead and write that open modal method up here. Remember, a method is just a function that lives inside of an object. So we'll come in here and say open modal. And we're going to say we want the modal container .classlist.add active. And then we want modal.set attribute, because remember we put an aria hidden equals true, and we now are going to change that to aria hidden equals false. Now, I keep forgetting to add commas after these functions, so let's go ahead and just add one now. It doesn't hurt anything to add it there, and then I won't forget. Now, if I come in here and I click on this, it should actually pop everything up, which is cool. That's what we want. If I refresh, it should go away, which works just great. Let's come back down. We've added one event listener. Once this pops up, however, there's a couple other things. We could type in here. Right now, we're not going to worry about that. We could also come and click on these, and we'd like them to actually add that class. I think it was called selected on that as well. We also need to be able to cancel and close out the modal. So maybe let's do that one next, because that way we've got kind of full functionality on the modal. So we did the open modal. Let's copy this down, and let's do a close modal. And here we're going to say we want not the create habit button, but the cancel button that we added up top. And when we click that, we want to run something called not open modal, but close modal. And you know what that means? We've got to write close modal. So we'll come up here, we'll copy this all down. And here, instead of adding it, we want to remove that. And instead of setting this to false, we want to set it to true. And before we actually run it here, let's go ahead and, well, we need to change this to close instead of open. That's the first thing. Second thing, when we close it, well, let's run it and first see what happens. So when we hit cancel, it will fade it away. But let's say we come in here and we typed in something, and then we hit cancel. We don't really want it to retain that value. So if you come in here and click again, you see how it actually already has that pre-written text from before in it. And when they cancel it, we're assuming that they want to get out of it all completely. So what we'll do is we'll set that new habit title. That's the actual field, that input field. We'll set its value to nothing. So that way, if we come in here, we save, come in here, we add something, and we cancel, and we come back in and open it again. Now it should be gone altogether, but that's not happening. So let's see what's going on here. Let's pull up the console and make sure we don't have any errors. Okay, modal is not defined. Modal container. Okay, so both of these here need to be set to modal container. And now let's see what happens. Come in here, we add some stuff, hit cancel. Okay, and it's empty again. That's perfect. Now there's something else we could do with this modal container. We could actually focus on the habit field itself. So let's do that. Let's pull this up here, and instead of running value equals 0, we're going to do focus. And what that will do is actually already insert their cursor. As soon as they click here, it's actually ready for them to type immediately. So that's a nice little addition. Let's do that. The other thing we can do is actually make it to where when they click on one of these, it highlights for them. we added a class in CSS, and let's check what that was. Icon.selected. So we can add this selected to whatever icon that they've clicked on. Let's come back down here then, and we're going to run another event listener, and we'll say event, and we'll do like selected icon, something like that. Let's grab the icons up top that we declared, and we'll say for each of the things that have an icon, we're going to run and add an event listener to it. So we'll say icon.add event listener, and we're listening again for a click. And let's just do this again as an arrow function. And I'll say we want to icon.classList.add selected. Okay, so we'll come over here and we can click and click and click. Now the problem is, which one have they selected? We want them to only have selected the last one to be visible. So we're kind of halfway there. So before we apply the class of selected, let's make sure we've looped through every existing icon and removed that class. So we'll say icons.forEach. So we're going to do another for each loop inside of here. Hopefully that isn't too confusing. And we're going to say for each icon, we want classList.remove selected. So what this will do is as soon as we click one, it will remove all the selected classes, which there aren't any right now, and then it will add one. We click here, it should remove every selected class and then apply it. So it, in effect, means only the last thing we clicked actually will have that selected class on it. Now there's one other thing we want to do when we close the modal, and then we'll wrap up this video and call it good for iteration 2. And that is when we cancel, we want to come in here and we want everything to be closed out as well. So this icons.forEach, we actually want to maybe break this out into its own little function so that we can use it in multiple places. So let's do that. Let's call it, let's put it in the UI object, and we'll call it remove selected icon, something like that. And then let's run up top here and add it. So we'll say remove selected from icons. Does that seem right? I think that was right. And we'll come in here and just paste that in there. Let's see if that works. So we come in here, click, click, click. Okay, that's working. Nope, it's not. It didn't work. It just added them and didn't remove any. So let's come back down. Remove selected from icons. You probably remember what I wrote. Remove selected icon. Okay, let's try again. We come in here, click, click. What is going wrong? Move selected icon. Come back down here. We need to actually run it. All right, third time's the charm. We come in here, click, click, click. Okay, perfect. Now, the other thing we want to do is when we cancel out, we want it to close out too. So that's what we were just saying a moment ago. So where is our cancel button? Our cancel button says close modal. So let's call, let's see, UI.remove selected icon when we run close modal. So now let's test this out, and if it works, then we will be good to go. We close this down, and that should no longer be selected, and it's not. And this is blinking for us, ready to go. Now we could probably also add like a window listener where when you hit the escape key on your keyboard, it closes this down as well. But you can kind of infinitely iterate on this. So we're going to call this good for now. Next time, what we're going to do is add the actual functionality where we add a real habit in here like this. And then the second thing we'll do is add it to where when you right click, it'll show a custom menu that you can delete whatever you've clicked on. But today we worked on this dark and light mode, and then we also worked on showing the modal, closing the modal, and kind of some UI, UX stuff related to that. Writing it like this is more realistic to real life, so I wanted to do a project that's more like this rather than just HTML, then CSS, and then JavaScript. All right, hopefully you enjoyed this. If you like this kind of thing and you want to see step 3 or iteration 3, please go ahead and subscribe, and I will be back in a few days with that. In the meantime, thanks for watching, and happy coding.